Welcome to those of you who are just coming in. We'll start in a few moments. We're delighted to have you here today. We'll start in just a few moments. Feel free to write in the chat and tell us where you are from. We are expecting over 30,000 people. No, just kidding, but this is a large number of people, and we welcome you, and we'd love to know where you're from. Hadassah, are you seeing things in the chat? Let's see if that works. Here we go.
Only my entry.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Wonderful. Excellent. So from Sweden, Switzerland, Chicago, Washington, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. Wow. Welcome to you all. Oh my goodness. It's what I love about Jewish Gen webinars is that everyone participates, and yeah, just great. Welcome. And we'll start in just a moment. I, being the German one in the group, like to start exactly on time, but we'll give another couple of minutes just for everyone to check in. Beautiful. That's great. Well, welcome to our first webinar of the season for Jewish Gen. I'm Karen Franklin. I'm the director of the Peter Mary Calico Jewish Genealogy Research Center of Jewish Gen and the Museum of Jewish Heritage. I have the longest title in history, and I'm happy to invite two colleagues who have shorter. I don't know, Barbara, your title might be just as long, or many of them. Hadassah, yours too. But welcome. This is the first time that, if I understand, that JRI and Jewish Gen are cooperating together in an event, though we have cooperated together for many years, and we are delighted to make this event the launch of our fall program. And we're particularly delighted to welcome Dr. Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimblett, my colleague of many years, our colleague of many years. We invite you. Thank you for responding, over 250 of you who have already joined us today, for writing where you are from in the chat, and feel free to use the chat throughout the session. However, if you have questions for our panel, for Barbara, please do put them in the question and answer section so that we can answer them at the end of this webinar. Barbara will speak for about 45 minutes and then take about 10 minutes of questions. Following this recorded program, there will be the opportunity to get a copy of the recording for each of you. It will be sent out, the link will be sent out, and also a survey. And it's required to give us 5 stars or 10 stars or whatever the top amount is. And we look forward to seeing you in the future as well. I am going to invite Hadassah on behalf of JRI Poland to say a few words now.
Thank you, Karen. Your name is not Avraham Grol, but Karen. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, right. I'm not Avraham Grol. I'm sorry. Yes, apologies. He was unable to join us at the last minute and you got stuck with me. Okay.
Not stuck. We're honored. Welcome, everyone. I'm Hadassah Lipsius. I'll give you just one title. I'm the vice president of JRI Poland, and JRI Poland is proud to continue our partnership with Jewish Gen by co-sponsoring this event, and look forward to continuing our 30-year partnership with Jewish Gen. The Jewish Records Indexing Poland's mission is to safeguard the evidence of the 1,000-year-old Jewish presence in current and former territories of Poland. Jewish Records indexing and extraction projects comprise the largest online database and finding aid for the Jewish documentation of records of Poland. The Poland database contains nearly 19,000 records just from the town of Opatów, which is the birthplace of Mayor Kirshenblatt, which we will hear somewhat about, including the database includes the birth record of Mayor Michael Kirshenblatt. So thank you, everyone. I will be taking care of the questions, so monitoring that. I hand it back to Karen.
Thank you very much. And I also should mention, following Hadassah, JewishGen, the worldwide home of Jewish genealogy. You must mostly be familiar with it because you're here today, so I won't go through the details, but we encourage you to explore the website fully for all of the many databases and ways of assistance that we offer. It is my tremendous pleasure to introduce my colleague BKG, as she's the beloved name for people who can't pronounce her entire name. Barbara and I have been colleagues for many years. The entire bio is online, so let me just say a few personal words about Barbara and her, I would say, signature project of memorializing her father and the life in Poland that he so beautifully illustrated for so many of us. Barbara, I don't know what to say. You're a visionary thinker who not only responds, but provides the impetus for many people to think about so many important issues in our museum world, in our memory world, in our Jewish genealogy world, in our cookbook world, in our Facebook record for our friends world and spreading information about our fields. That's probably the unusual introduction to you, but I hope it provides details on just a few dimensions of your extraordinary contributions to the field. And so, Barbara, please begin to discuss today Opatów and your father's work, and welcome on behalf of JewishGen, JRI Poland.
Well, thank you very, very much, Karen. Thank you for filling in. As I told Avraham when he told me that he couldn't come today, I said, well, we can't do better than Karen. So thank you so much. And Hadassah, thank you also. Well, I'm a longstanding and great fan of JewishGen and JRI Poland, and especially of Stanley, who has been the stalwart leader of this extraordinary project. And it's especially meaningful to me to be speaking to those who are very devoted to genealogy, because I would say that the message that I want to convey today, the real sort of heart of this, is the relationship between the places where our families once lived and what those places are like today, and how they got to be that way, and what is the relationship of those who live there today to the Jewish past of their towns, and what is our relationship to those towns today that were once Stetls. So that's where the title of my talk comes from, which is From Stetl to Post-Jewish Town. Okay, just one second. All right. Okay. From Stetl to post-Jewish town, and I'll explain. The word post-Jewish doesn't mean very much or anything in English. For most people, they've never heard the term, but it's really meaningful in Polish. But I'll say more about that in a moment. So the starting point for what I will talk to you about today is a project that I began with my father, Meyer Kirshenblatt, who was born in 1916. I began recording interviews with him, and not only interviewing him, but recording those interviews in 1967. And I continued to record him for more than 40 years until he died at the age of 93 in 2009. So that's really the starting point. And believe it or not, even after he died, there were questions I still had and wished I could have asked him, especially as I was working on the core exhibition at Polin Museum of the History of Polish Jews. So many questions came up, and I would have given anything to have been able to ask them, even after 40 years. Now, when I was interviewing him, I was taking notes in my notebook, and whenever I didn't understand something, because he was he was very interested. He was like a living version of popular mechanics. I don't know how many of you are old enough or so inclined who remember a magazine called Popular Mechanics, but he was like a living version of it. And he was interested in how things worked, and he would describe to me in excruciating detail, for example, the water pump that was used to put out fires. And I didn't understand how it worked, so he would make me a diagram. And he did that innumerable times. And what that made me realize is that he had an absolutely extraordinary memory and that he could actually draw in relation to what he was telling me. But and he was so, I think that because his memory was so visual, I have the feeling that it was a key to him being able to remember. So we continued along, and in 1959 he got sick, and he was worried that if he got better, but he was worried that if he got sick again, that my mother would get stuck with the business, and that therefore he said, I'm going to sell the business. He had a wallpaper paint and floor covering store, and he's going to retire. He was 59 years old, and he retired. And here was a person who had been active, had his store open 7 days a week, had a lot of local people that would come in and chat with him. Now he's retired. There's no store, and it was clear that he needed a project. That he was, I would say, that he was actually depressed. And so I had the thought that maybe he could paint what he remembers. And my mother supported this idea. My husband, who's an artist, supported this idea. And we begged and pleaded with him for 10 years. We provided him with with paint and brushes and canvas and easel and Conti crayons and everything you could imagine. And it all accumulated. It was Father's Day, anniversary, birthday, whatever, nothing, nothing, nothing. One day my mother came and he said, I can't do it. I've never had lessons. One day my mother came home from the local JCC, the Jewish Community Center, and she said to him, I've signed you up for art classes and they don't give refunds. So he had no choice. He had to go. But after one or two classes in life drawing and in still life, it was hopeless. And I just said to him, look, forget about classes. Just paint what you remember. Just try. And he did. And he was astonished. I'll show you in a moment his first painting. But first, let him introduce himself to you. So he says he was named after his great grandfather, Meyer Machel Guttmacher. Everybody in town had a nickname. His was Meyer Thomas, Meyer July, because July was the hottest month of the year. And Meyer Thomas means crazy Meyer. People get excited when it's hot. And I was an excitable kid. So what was he? I mean, he was not just excitable. He had an insatiable curiosity, and he had the extraordinary capacity to find everything interesting. So it wouldn't matter, something that somebody else would overlook and find either trivial or boring, he found interesting. And in this particular painting, Boy with a Herring, he introduces himself in terms of his schoolboy outfit. He went to the Polish public school. 90% of Jewish kids went to Polish public school. They couldn't afford the fee for the private Jewish schools. And he starts with the hat and with the blazer and the Slonimsky collar and the plus fours and the two sets of socks and the red ski boots and the brass eyelets and the yellow shoelaces. And about every element in this outfit, he's got a story, including the herring. And the herring story is fantastic. I'll save it. And if you're interested, I will tell you everything you ever wanted to know about the herring that he's carrying here. Now, when I was working with him, we transcribed the tapes. And when I was working with him on the manuscript for the book that we published in 2007, I noticed there was a discrepancy. He completed 7 grades of Polish public school. That is the sum total of his formal education and, of course, later. But he was 15 when he graduated. And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, he failed a year. I said, you failed a year? How is that possible? He stressed education. He expected his 3 daughters to excel at school. Well, he says, I played hooky. I said, what do you mean you played hooky? He said, well, he says, how do you think I know all about the blacksmith, the cooper, the rope maker, the shoemaker, the tailor, the kleptomaniac, the market day, the brush makers, in other words, the town was his school. The town was his curriculum. He found it much more interesting to run around the town with his hoop and to explore every nook and cranny and to observe every aspect of everyday life, much more interesting than sitting in a schoolroom. And this particular painting with the hoop is going to be important when I present to you the way in which we organized a wonderful exhibition that is on right now at Pauline Museum, but we'll come to that in a moment. So Apatov, Abt in Yiddish, is the town where he was born, located near Kielce, which was the provincial seat at the time. And during the 30s, between 9 and 10,000 people lived in Apatov. About 65% of them were Jews. And this is a really classic way of creating a panorama. It's not a skyline in the way that we think. It's much more like 16th and 17th century panoramas, which are essentially all the important elements in the town are put into one panorama, starting, believe it or not, west on the right, east on the left, south is above and north is below. And that is how the maps were made as well. It's oriented very differently from the way we would orient it today. So the synagogue is here, and the church, and the town well, and the World War I monument, and the remnants of the ancient city gate. And of course, the big, huge church bell. So you get a sense of this very, very beautiful, wonderful panorama. Now, in the course of these interviews, my father would refer to the corner of this street and that street, or at the top of such and such a street. And by the time we were done, I had absolutely no idea where anything was. Where was the shul? Where was Interim Medrash? Where was Moira Berman's Cheder? Where was the monastery, the lake, the town well? So I said, make me a map. And my father made a map. And this is a real memory map. And you know them from Yizkor books. You know them from the memorial books. They're wonderful, wonderful memory maps in the memorial books. And there is one, of course, in the memorial book for Apatov as well. Now, this is actually the very first painting. And this would have been, this is 1990. He actually began drawing in 1989, but this is the first painting. And what I love many things about this painting, but one of the things I love is to see how he uses what he knows when he was a house painter and then had his paint store. And you can see these elements. He learned how to imitate wood, how to do wood graining. Look at that table. That is a kind of a festival of wood graining, and we see it a lot in other paintings. I mean, in my childhood home, every door was a different wood: teak, maple, oak, pine. And of course, it was all faked because he knew how to imitate those woods. But also, these walls are stenciled. It was wallpaper was too expensive. It was cheaper to have someone come and whitewash the walls and stencil them. But there are many other things we could say about this painting, but it was the first one because he knew the kitchen was my favorite place. And my mother said to him, Meyer, paint the kitchen. Do it for Barbara. She'll use it in her work. And he did. And once he saw what he could do, you couldn't stop him. So one of the things I so value about not only his memories, but about his paintings is there's nothing generic. Every painting is a story. The people who are in the paintings are people with a name, a face, a story, a family, a biography, a fate. And to give you a sense of it, this painting is called The White Pajamas. And it is the story of a shoemaker. And it's a bit like in Diderot's 18th century encyclopedia. He had two ways of showing craft. One was to show the whole scene, the workshop, which is what you see here. The other was to have a diagram that showed step by step how you make, for example, in this case, a shoe. And my father did both. Essentially, he did both. And in this case, it's a workshop, and you can see that the family is living and working in the same place, that these workshops were actually in their homes. And at most they would have two rooms. My father's family considered themselves middle class, and they were 7 people in 2 rooms. They were 2 parents, 4 children, 4 boys, and a nanny. And they lived in 2 rooms. And by the standards of Apatov in the 1920s and 30s, that was considered middle class. So in this case, this poor shoemaker had 7 daughters, and he every time a baby boy was born, it died. So he went to the rabbi. He said, "Rabbi, Rabbi, you've got to help me. What am I going to do? I've got 7 daughters. How will I ever come up with 7 dowries? And every time a boy is born, he dies. Who's going to say Kaddish for me?" So the rabbi said, "Look, I'm going to give you an amulet. You put it around the baby. The next time a boy is born, put it around his neck and dress him in white. So when the angel of death comes to get him, the angel of death will think that the boy's already dead because he'll mistake the white the white clothing as a burial shroud, and he'll pass over him and the boy will survive." Sure enough, the boy survived. And my father remembers that in 1934, when my father, his 3 brothers, and his mother left for Canada, for Toronto, that the boy was then 14 and he was still dressed in white. And then in 1942, when the Jews of Apatov were deported to Treblinka, he was deported with them and perished there, still dressed in the white pajamas. So that gives you a feeling for the relationship between how my father remembered in words and how he remembers visually, and how the two complement each other. That these paintings are not illustrations of the words, and the words are not a caption to the painting. This is a kind of storytelling in words and images at the same time. Now, this painting is even more special to me than it always has been for one simple reason. The Jews settled in Apatov over 500 years ago, and their wonderful masonry synagogue was about 500 years old. And it was an incredibly beautiful painted interior. And what I didn't know is that in the 1930s, this synagogue was actually registered as a historic building among the treasures, the architectural treasures in the Kielce region. And so in Kielce, it was registered as an historic landmark. And I haven't had an opportunity to explore the archives in Kielce, assuming that the documents still exist, that they weren't destroyed during the war. But so far as we know, there is no record at all of what the interior of this synagogue looked like. No record. No photographs, no drawings, nothing. That my father's memory and this painting of the interior of this synagogue is all we've got. And it's extraordinary. He remembers on the left, you can see the barred openings for the women's section, the tribes of Israel, the zodiac signs on by the stained glass windows, the Wailing Wall, the tomb of Rachel, the 4 animals of Pirkei Avot, the spies and the grapes, the characteristic central bima, and this would have been the high holidays, and you can see the boys' choir on the steps. And my father, who's the kind of the Where's Waldo of the Stetl, he's there in blue, standing on the steps as part of the choir. And this painting actually leads to a whole set of stories about all the pranks that the boys used to play during the high holidays, during Yom Kippur, because during the cold weather, in fact, the services were held in one of the many best medrashes in the town. It was too cold, and the synagogue was too big to heat it up. So here, for example, would be Simchas Torah in one of the best medrashes, the one that my father's father would go to, and there are many stories associated with this painting as well. I especially love the malach, the angel, which is what this talit, this tallis arrangement was called. In other words, little boys who were too small to walk around with their own apple and flag and candle, they would be gathered together under one tallis, and that would be a part that's how they would be in the procession of the Torah scrolls during Simchas Torah. Purim was, of course, a very appreciated holiday, particularly for kids. But what was special in Apatov, but not only there, it was true in other towns, and that is the Purim Spiel, the folk drama. And the favorite of the Purim plays that were performed in Apatov before the war was the Krakow Wedding. And it was a mock wedding, and of course only men were the actors. They were dressed up as women, dressed up in what they thought of as the regional costume of the Krakow region. They would go to better houses where they would be able to get a few pennies, maybe a drink of schnapps, a little snack to eat. And of course, the kids would follow around and peek in through the window. But there's a whole story here about this particular a man and his wife who took in a child. They couldn't have kids of their own. So they went to a family that had 10 kids and said, give us one. And basically, the family said, okay, here's a kid, you can raise him. But the child never lost touch with his birth family, and it was no formal adoption. You could say he was a foster child, although I don't even think that concept existed. And this painting is really speaks to today, because this custom of trying to avert the plague or stop the plague by doing a great good deed in the form of the schwarze Chuppah or schwarze Chasana, the black canopy or wedding canopy or the black wedding, by taking two individuals who were impossible to marry off. They could be disabled, poor, orphaned, and marrying them in the cemetery and beseeching the dead to intercede with the Almighty on behalf of the living. And this practice was actually carried out in Bnei Brak in Israel during COVID. So and my father learned of it actually from the Yizkor book regarding the plague of the 1890s, which was apparently just terrible in terms of the death toll. And this is how he visualized that black wedding based on the story in the Yizkor book. Now, my father's father, my paternal grandfather, left Poland in 1928 because he went bankrupt. How he went bankrupt, why he went bankrupt is another story. I'm happy to tell it to you if you're interested during the Q&A. But in any event, he left, and and 6 years went by, and my grandmother and my father and the three brothers were in Poland. And my father said to his mother, he said, look, he said, if father doesn't send us a ticket and bring us to Canada, he said, we're going to disperse and you'll never see the family together again. So sure enough, the tickets came and the rest of the family came to Canada. And my father recalls the journey and approaching, through the ice flows past Newfoundland to Halifax and then onto Toronto. And how he prepared for the family in Toronto, that's another story, which I'd be happy to tell you as well. Now, while my father did not experience the Holocaust directly himself, he was not in Poland, but he lost his mother's family, he lost his father's family. His father's family was from Ilja or Drilj in Yiddish, and this is what happened to his father's family. Essentially, the boys in my father's family, the men, which would be my grandfather's brothers, they snuck out of the ghetto and they were in the forest with the partisans during the spring and summer. But once winter came and there was snow, they couldn't stay in the forest. So they snuck back into the ghetto and somebody snitched on them. The Germans found out and they took my father's grandmother and tied her to a tree. They lined up all of her children and their that is, who were still in Poland, their spouses and their children. They shot them in front of her eyes, and then they shot her. So my father had learned this from the letters that came right after the war and from the few survivors who knew, who had been there and who had either witnessed or heard firsthand about what had happened. And he could not begin to imagine how he would paint this until we visited a Prado in Madrid. And my husband, who's an artist, took him upstairs to Goya's Disasters of War. And the moment that he saw this incredible painting, he said he knew how he could paint what happened to his father's family. Now, I want to turn now to what happens when you exhibit these paintings. And I want to compare two cases because it's the second case that will lead us to the post-Jewish town, which is really the focus. It's what I really want to focus on today and what I feel carries a very important message for all of us and especially for those who have agreed to be with us today. So this, as you know, is the Jewish Museum here in New York in the wonderful Warburg Mansion on Fifth Avenue. And in 2009, they mounted a wonderful exhibition of my father's paintings. It was the main exhibition for that season. It was the entire first floor. And it was basically titled as the book was titled, the book that had appeared 2 years earlier. They Call Me Meyer July, Painted Memories of a Jewish Childhood in Poland Before the Holocaust. And essentially, it's the story from his earliest memories to the paintings of what happened to his family during the Holocaust, and it ends there. Nothing beyond that. Now, this is what the exhibition looked like. So the Jewish Museum's mission is to explore the Jewish experience through art. And so this was a really ideal opportunity. And it was done in a way that was so, I would say, minimalist and beautiful, and not white walls, but rather a series of pastels that really conveyed the season of my father's youth, which was a kind of perpetual spring and summer. I mean, at one point I said to him, I have everything is spring and summer. Did you not have winter? What happened to winter? And then he did a series of winter paintings. But really, the season of his youth was spring, summer, and the early autumn. So I think that the lighting and the color really try to capture that. And it was, I thought, exquisitely, absolutely exquisitely done. And the curation was all about putting these paintings in ensembles, juxtapositions, sequences to tell the story. And it was absolutely splendid. And then his departure, the story of his leaving, and then the fate of his family during the Holocaust, and then an invitation to visitors to sit down with a little card and a pencil. And what is it they remember? And not no computer. This was a pretty much 100%, almost 100% analog, and which I found refreshing, particularly in our hyper multimedia world. And it was a great success. The New York Times, Roberta Smith, front page of the art section. What could be better? And she loved the exhibition. So it was a big success, and it was a kind of exhibition that the Jewish Museum in New York could do consistent with its mission. So the Jewish Museum is on Museum Mile, committed to illuminating the complexity and vibrancy of Jewish culture for a global audience, present the work of diverse artists, share ideas, provoke dialogue, promote understanding. Okay. But what happens in Warsaw? And a question I want to put to you, and I would love for us to discuss this, and that is, however successful this exhibition was in New York, it was exponentially more successful in Warsaw. And the question is, why? In Warsaw, in the first 2 months of this exhibition, we had over 20,000 visitors. And I think we had more than 20,000 visitors for the entire run of the Jewish Museum exhibition. So by the time that this exhibition, the one in Warsaw, closes, which is December 16th, 2024, we'll have, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe, at least 5 times that number, maybe more. So what's the mission and what's the location of the museum in Warsaw? Because I think trying to understand location is everything. Trying to understand location, trying to understand context can show us how differently these memories and these paintings are understood and appreciated in these two very different places, and how different is their impact. So the mission of Polin Museum, to preserve and recall the memory of the history of Polish Jews, and to counteract anti-Semitism, discrimination, and exclusion by fostering mutual understanding and respect. So similar, but actually quite different. So Polin Museum, I think, as many of you have visited, and as many of you know, this year, 2014, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary, which is extraordinary. I can't believe that 10 years have passed since we had our grand opening. And this is the place where this museum stands, which is on the ruins of the Warsaw Ghetto after the Germans suppressed the uprising in 1943 and destroyed what had been the pre-war Jewish neighborhood and home to the largest Jewish community in Europe during the interwar years. Now, that rubble is symbolically, well, the location, of course, is very important because the museum is actually located not only on that territory, but in the very place where the uprising broke out and facing the monument to the ghetto heroes. Now, the rubble is symbolic in another way. They began without a collection. Now, there is a collection at the Jewish Historical Institute, but it's largely 19th and 20th century, and it's largely paintings, photographs, and memorabilia. It, it is certainly not a collection that could sustain a 1,000-year story. And so the permanent exhibition at the museum, the Poline Museum, is really what I like to think of as a theater of history. It works scenographically, and it also covers a very, very big territory. That is, the historical territory of this 1,000-year story is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which extended for over 200 years from the 16th to the 18th century. And it covers what is today Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania, Belarus, Latvia, and adjoining countries. So this big red map really shows us what was once one of the most diverse countries in all of Europe, diverse in terms of language, religion, culture, very, very diverse. And it's bigger than what we think of as Poland, strictly speaking. And it is really the territory of our 1,000-year history. So in the absence of objects, we created a hand-painted medieval gallery. We wanted to represent one of the crowning achievements architecturally of East European Jews, the wooden synagogue. This one was in Gwoździec. We believe it burnt to the ground during World War I when the Russian front moved through Gwoździec, which is today in Ukraine. And so we set about basically building it, that is to say, building the timber frame roof and painting the beautiful painted ceiling using traditional tools, techniques, and materials to create this extraordinary installation at the museum in the absence of a collection, although we do have original objects and we continue to include them. But there is much that we can do in our temporary exhibitions to build on the core exhibition. And the most recent example is the exhibition is there now. And the title in Poland is Po Żydowskie, which in English translates awkwardly as post-Jewish, Stetl Apatov, through the eyes of Meyer Kirshenblatt. And the museum has done a wonderful job of getting the word out with this poster, and it was on bus stops and on these columns and on buses and billboards and everywhere. So you can imagine, if you can imagine Warsaw plastered with this image and inviting the public to come to Poline Museum to explore post-Jewish, how the Stetl became a post-Jewish town. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. So the first thing is we are very careful. And here you can see where Apatov is in relation to Poland today, which is the red line, and in relation to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Now, when we say Stetl, we're very careful. And what we say is that in Yiddish, Stetl simply means town. In English and other languages, it tends to mean, in quotation marks, Jewish town. Now, when we think of towns in this part of the world, particularly in Poland, but also Ukraine and Lithuania, when the towns were created during the medieval period, they were created according to German town law. They were created as market towns, and they were intended to be the economic hub of what was a very agricultural and continued to be a very, very agricultural territory. They were the economic hubs on these noble estates on Latifundia. They were market towns. They had enormous, the smallest towns had enormous marketplaces. They had market days. They had annual, in some cases, twice a year, big fairs. And they had a very particular town layout and way of governing the town. So these towns are very specific. Now, in those places where Jews were expected to settle or were already present, provision was made on the location document, which is the document that specified how the town is to be laid out, there were already provisions made for the essentials of a Jewish community, the synagogue and the cemetery, and of course there had to be a mikveh. So what happened was that Jews were primarily urban. They settled either in cities or predominantly in towns. And in those towns, they formed a large percentage of the population. This is something I know that you know well. In Apatov, 65% of the population. In other towns, and I'll show you a diagram in a moment, could be much, much greater. And there were more than 1,000 of these so-called Jewish towns, these Stetl, in Poland, and even more beyond its borders. So here is an example. In Szydłowiec, 77%. In Izbica, 92.8% was Jewish. In Pszytek, 80.5% was Jewish. In Opatów, 61.8%. In Lashchów, 93%. Can you imagine all right, New Square, Muncie, maybe Lakewood, New Jersey, but could you imagine more than 1,000 towns in a comparable territory in the United States that would have population of 92% Jewish? It's unimaginable. But this formation, these Städtlach, became the most characteristic form of Jewish settlement. And the high percentage, defined essentially by the high percentage of Jews living there. So what then? So so have a look. Here's a pre-war. Actually, I think it's probably around World War I. An example of market day in Apatov specifically, and this is how my father remembers market day in his town. Of course, it would have been much, much fuller. This was an enormous marketplace, so the scale doesn't reflect how big the marketplace was, nor how crowded it was, which I'll show you again another moment. But his memories of market day, which you can imagine each week, market day for a kid would have been just amazing. So, and he was uncensored. So the woman in red is the town prostitute. Market day was her best day. Peasants are coming in with all of their agricultural products, and they're buying from the Jewish shopkeepers and stall keepers around the marketplace. And he remembers all the pranks they used to play. This is what the marketplace looks like today. There are no more market days. These marketplaces are, for the most part, have been converted into parks. And that's the case in Apatov as well. This is a pre-war photograph. Natalia Romik and Justyna Kojarska-Schultz, the two curators of the exhibition, did a wonderful job of research going into the archives and finding pre-war photographs of the town. These are photographs that I had never seen before, but just to give you a little bit of a sense, and also photographs after the war. And you can see that the town, parts of the town were simply devastated. So now, post-Jewish. What does it mean? Well, let's first of all remember that in Polish, po-żydowskie means one thing. It refers only and strictly to property, and to property created by dispossession as a result of the Holocaust. We never, to my knowledge, po-żydowskie is not a word that is applied to property before the Holocaust. And in the United States, if the word is used at all, which is rare, it refers to identity, not property. So that is the most specific. And where does the word come from? Where was it first used? It first appears in the mid-1940s on these geological survey maps that were made of the town, in this case Opatów, to show where everything is, where the properties are, what state they're in, who they belong to. So where you see the blue square is written po-żydowskie, and that word will appear at the bottom. You can see it again, another blue square, po-żydowskie. Now, The incredible thing about this term is that in many ways, particularly in the 40s, it is referring to property in limbo, which is to say, the owners can't be found. Either they were murdered, or we don't know how to locate them, nor their heirs. So it holds, in a way, the term holds in, I would say, in limbo, the question as to whether ever these po-Żydowskie properties might revert back to their original owners. And of course, this involves questions of restitution, etc. But here, what we're interested in is the term and a broadening of an understanding of it. So here, this would be in this, and of course, Apatov, like the other more than 1,000 towns where Jews once lived, and the more than 1,000 Stetl, they're all post-Jewish towns, all of them. The story of Apatov is the story of all Stetl in not only Poland, but in the surrounding area. So there are these pre-war wooden buildings, and many of them are dilapidated. And in this particular case, this was the black school because the color of the wood was very dark. And it was a school that was attended by both Jewish and Christian kids. And it was so dilapidated, it was in ruins, that it was about to be demolished. So Poland Museum decided to buy the building and to dismantle it and to bring the wood to Warsaw, fumigate it, and fabricate the whole exhibition out of this recycled wood from this pre-war wooden building that had once been a school for Jewish and Christian kids. And they thought when they first began working on the exhibition that there would be no objects, that nothing would have survived. And lo and behold, there is one collector, not Jewish, in Apatov, Jerzy Britkowski, who is an avid collector of all things Jewish, including a very, very large collection of Jewish objects from Apatov. Of course, a segment of a Torah scroll, Sabbath candles, and these wooden Hanukkah lamps and menorahs, which I find incredibly moving, because you can imagine during the period of the ghetto, the Germans confiscated anything of value, which means silver, brass, copper. And so what did Jews do when it came to honoring Hanukkah? They carved their own Hanukkah lamps. And so he has collected some of those. And we know that this was not exclusive to Apatov. The Jewish Museum in New York has this example, and it was carved in Theresienstadt. So these are really quintessentially Holocaust objects, but we think of them even so as post-Jewish. So what happened to the synagogue? What happened to the cemetery? What happened to the mikveh? How do those stories help us to understand the nature, the character of a post-Jewish town? And most importantly, the relationship of those who are living there now to their Jewish past, and our relationship to those post-Jewish towns and the people who live there today. So this is the exterior of the synagogue as my father remembers it. The interior, he painted this interior many times. And the building was actually still standing. It was damaged during the war, and then it was still standing. And in the 1950s, it had become such a ruin that the townspeople demolished it and recycled the materials. That was the fate. And all that's left is a small chunk of the wall, that little tiny chunk of the wall, and a vacant lot. And nothing has been built on that lot. And a few metal elements that somehow or other survived and that were collected by Britkowski. What happened to the cemetery? You can imagine if Jews lived in Apatov for 500 years, and they were 6,500 people in the 20s and 30s. you can imagine the thousands upon thousands of tombstones that must have been there. Those tombstones were repurposed during the Holocaust. The Germans used them to regulate the river, and they lined the banks to avoid erosion, and they were built into retaining walls. They were used to create flooring, and this is what the cemetery became. It became a park, and there were a few token gestures to indicate that it had been a cemetery. Of course, the bodies are still buried there. Technically, it's still a cemetery, but no tombstones. However, in the last few years, local history buffs who are very committed to the Jewish past in Poland, living in Opatów today, not Jewish, they have been collecting fragments of mitzvahs, fragments of tombstones, and they made a lapidarium. And on the 80th anniversary of the deportation of the Jews of Opatów to Treblinka, they had an opening of the lapidarium as part of their commemoration. What happened to the mikveh? Now, you may well ask, how did my father know what Woman's Day at the mikveh looked like? Well, all I can tell you is he had a vivid imagination. But he also painted, of course, Men's Day. That building survived. It's the pink building that you see on the right. And right after the war, it became, and it still is, a candy factory producing milk fudge or caramel candies. And my father remembers vividly those precise candies, krufki, or little cows. And they still do them by hand exactly as he remembers. Now, how did we exhibit this concept from the Stetl to the post-Jewish town? And why do we think it's so important? The way that we've done it is, first of all, you can see here the recycled wood that is been used to create these frames. And these frames have the Stetl as my father remembers it on one side, and on the other side, what happened. So, and it is, and the exhibition has encircled the visitor with the paintings of Opatów as my father remembers it, so that the paintings they are along the perimeter of the gallery, all four walls, completely encircling the visitor with these incredible images of a childhood in Poland, as remembered, obviously post-war, but from the perspective of a youngster in Poland. And of course, we exhibit from objects from the collection of Brzydkowski, these post-Jewish objects, and the memory map, and my father with the hoop, which is the inspiration for this circular presentation of the town. The mikveh on one side, and this is, as I showed you the painting, and the Holocaust image, and then on the other side, we would show everything that is related to it. And what I find really extraordinary is how the town received, how Opatów received this exhibition. So I'm going to conclude just with a few comments on this, and then I want to open it to discussion. And that is that after the exhibition opened, the museum has a program called Museum on Wheels, where it has a kind of pop-up museum that it travels to towns across the length and breadth of Poland with a population of less than 50,000. And today, Opatów's population is about 7,000. And they brought the Museum on Wheels to Opatów the week after the exhibition opened in Warsaw. And what did the town do? So it put up reproductions of the paintings in the places in Opatów today that those paintings represent. And Maria Bożecka, who is here, is a local history buff, and she gave guided tours. And they enlarged figures from the paintings, and they placed them all over the town. But they also looked for traces that could still be found of Jewish presence, including the places where there had once been a mezuzah, and today is only a cavity after the mezuzah was removed. But they also found balconies where there had been a sukkah, and they found other I would say other traces. So I want to stop with that. And I want to leave you with a question, of course, in addition to any questions that you might have. But I want to leave you with the question, why has this exhibition so touched the Polish public, had such an impact, and was so enthusiastically received by the Polish public in excess of anything I've ever seen wherever this exhibition has been shown before? Jewish Museum, Jewish Historical Museum in Amsterdam, the Magnus Museum in Berkeley, the Koffler Gallery in Toronto, you name it. That's my question to you, and I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Based on the comments, but not just me, but based on the comments in the chat, everybody enjoyed the lecture. So I may ask some questions that you may have covered, but seems that there are a lot of common questions that people keep on asking. One of the questions that people have asked, besides the exhibit, is there any published document or published book based on the exhibit of the artwork?
Yes. So first of all, although it's out of print, you can pick up used copies of the book that I did with my father, University of California Press. And in it is the, hundreds of pages, basically of the interviews and about 200, maybe more, of his paintings in full color. So the book is called They Called Me Meyer July, Painted Memories of a Jewish Childhood in Poland Before the Holocaust. And you'll be able to find used copies at, Amazon, A-Books, Thrift, all of those online booksellers. Not a problem. That's the first thing. The second is we published a beautiful catalog, essentially an accompanying book with essays that are based on, pardon me, and supplement the exhibition. And you can order that as an ebook from the museum website. And I think we can put these links into the follow-up email that will go out after today. I will provide all this information for you, links and publications. And also, the museum has supported the translation into Polish of my father's book from 2007. And they have supported, and it will soon appear, a Polish translation of the complete Yisker book from Apatov, which is extraordinary too. So there are then the exhibition book, and there is the original book in English, and then there are these two books in Polish. So that would be, and now there are also some books in Polish that have a lot of documents specifically on the history of Jews of Opatów for 500 years that are the work of a local enthusiast. And I will share all that information so that it can be circulated to all of you who were kind enough to come today.
So when you say local enthusiast, you mean a local enthusiast in Opatów?
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, one of the archivists in the Polish State Archive, even though she's not living there now, comes from there and always has a keen interest in any of the information on the town and also the Jewish records from the town itself. And we've been, any questions have been asked about the recording, and yes, there has been it was recorded, and there will be additional information sent to everybody. So another question, and I think we're going to run over our time. So, but I thank everybody for hanging in. It's asking about the urban and market day. What did the Jewish population do? What did they sell? Their produce. This particular person believes that their father was a farmer, and they wanted to know what other items
Sure.
would have been sold on the market
So,
day.
yeah, Jews, I mean, there were Jews on the land, and there were Jews who were farming, and there were also Jews living in villages. But the most characteristic form of Jewish settlement was the town. And so, speaking only about the town, basically, for example, Apatov was known as specializing in brush making. And there were, I can't remember now, 10 or 12 small brush making workshops. And my father remembers in detail, and in fact, he provides step-by-step drawings how to make a brush and a painting showing step-by-step from bringing the horsehair to the brush workshop and bringing the wood that would be used for the top of the brush and every step of the way. So the Jews concentrated in crafts and in as merchants, as artisans and merchants. So they were, and of course they serviced the Jewish community. So they were butchers and they were bakers. And in terms of the artisans, they were tailors, shoemakers, brush makers, coopers, rope makers. They dealt in hides. There was a Jewish blacksmith. They were fishmongers. I mean, it was quite actually quite diversified in terms of of craft. And then in terms of selling, they obviously they had clothing shops. They had shops that sold imported goods, that sold anything made of metal. Um, so I would say and shoes. In other words, you go to a cobbler and have the shoes made, but they also had ready-made shoes and boots and that kind of thing. So, but basically they were shopkeepers and artisans for the most part. But there were also factory owners that were considered really the wealthiest Jews in town. Mandelbaum Soap Factory would be one example, and the owner of the flour mill. Jewish, and these would be wealthy businessmen.
So it's interesting that a lot of people have answered that their family actually came from Apatov, and one gentleman said that his mother worked in the brush factory.
There you go.
So there's proof, right?
There you go. You see, I wasn't lying.
So were there do you know if there's other towns that have done similar activity, such as, the reproduction of the town?
Well, okay, so I think what's extraordinary, and this goes to the question, how do people who live in the towns today deal with the Jewish past, and what is our relationship to those towns and those who live there today? And this for me is critically important. Critically important. So Polin Museum gives out annually a Polin Award. It's a plebiscite. They invite the public to nominate individuals and organizations who are preserving the memory of the Jewish past of their towns. You would not believe what people are doing. You just wouldn't, and they're not Jewish. You would not believe. It could be a high school teacher in a town of two, or like really a teeny tiny town, close to the border of Ukraine, who, has undertaken an educational project, or have created, have put up landmarks, who have cleaned up the cemetery, who have are engaged in publishing or in translation, or have engaged school kids. There just are innumerable individuals and projects, and each year there's a lineup of maybe 10 or 12 or more finalists, and then there are the winners of the award. And it's extraordinarily moving to see how devoted, how committed these local activists are. Some of them are major projects like Brummer Grodzka in Lublin. If you're there, you have to visit them. Or the Zuckerman Foundation in Benjin, also doing amazing work. Or Borderlands in Sena, also so creative. Or the Auschwitz Cultural Center in Oswiecim. They're just all these projects that are really exemplary in terms of grassroots efforts, local efforts, and these are voluntary, and these are, I would say, they're often done, with no resources to speak of.
Okay, let me see if we ask one more question. A lot of praise, so we'll copy the comments in here. And also there's a lot of questions of people trying to cross show my family comes to this town. Oh yeah, my family also comes from this town. So So we're making shidduchim as we go here. Somebody asked about the name of the hand-painted synagogue that was reproduced at, what was the name of the town of the hand-painted synagogue at the Polin
Oh,
Museum?
it's from the town of Gwoździec, which was in Poland and is today in Ukraine.
Ah, okay. All right. I thank you for everybody. If you have any more questions, we will answer it back. I appreciate
Okay,
all the time.
Hadassah, I have a quick question for you
Yes.
and for Karen. Is it possible to save the chat?
Somebody asked the same question. I'm not sure if how Avrami has set it up, but I can go in and change and save it manually, which I will do.
That would be great, because there are links there and there are questions there, and I would be happy, insofar as I can, to provide some information that you could include in the post webinar email.
Okay. I will try to do that. In a second. I'm gonna move it in, see if it worked.
I just want to make sure that we don't close it and then lose. Oh, let me see. It should be
Yeah, it looks
posted.
like I was able to copy every. Well, I'm gonna try to just do it one more time. Before Karen closes us out, I will try.
That would be great. That would be great.
Somebody said that Avram Grohl does not set it to copy, but maybe that's just for the regular
Here
user.
it says save chat. If you look in the chat, there's 3 little dots on the bottom right, and you can save the chat. So I just feel like I would love to read what people wrote and also to respond.
Karen, are you able to see the save chat?
I'll tell you in a moment whether I've got it.
And copy it into something else.
Oh, I managed to save it.
Yep.
Yep, I managed to save it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Karen, you take over the last parts of it.
I thought I had, it would have been helpful if I had unmuted myself. Oh, well, I'm not Avrami Grohl. Thank you all for participating. You had, we have participants from 26 states and 13 countries. And
Wow.
information will be sent out with regard to having access to the show, to the program later on, and also stay tuned for future programs. You'll be receiving information by email about that. I think we're good with the chat as far as I understand in terms of preserving it. I'll stay on for a few minutes. Thank you everyone for participating, and please be in touch with us if you have any questions about JewishGen or if we can be helpful to you. Thank you. Barbara, Hadassah, are we good with the copy of the chat then?
Actually, you know what? I'm gonna copy it again because I see there's more stuff came in.
People are thanking you. It was,
Yeah.
and I thank you too. It was wonderful.
That's okay. I'm gonna.
From one after to another. I love it.
Yeah, I think.
Thank you all.
Okay. Okay, I think we maybe have it all now, and I'll send it to you.
Wonderful. Okay.
Okay, thanks so much.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye now.